here last week, doesn't really matter. I was doing my George H.W. Bush bit. In costume and character as the man himself, kind of talking about his life and various shady misdeeds. And tonight's set will be all about kind of untangling some of those very inside baseball sort of references. Now, why this obsession with a dead one-term president, you might ask?
Why?
Well, I think George H.W. Bush is a pretty strong contender for most evil U.S. president, and that's saying a lot, because there have been some pretty shitty people in that role, let me tell you. What makes him so sordid, though? Well, for one thing, he used to be director of the CIA. That should be pretty self-explanatory. I think you've got to be a real piece of shit to serve a role like that. But that mere fact alone kind of undersells the fact that for decades, this dude was like the Forrest Gump of the CIA. As in, for decades, wherever and whenever the CIA was doing shady shit, Poppy Bush was just around the corner. Now, the genesis of this arguably comes during the 50s and 60s, when he serves as a major executive in a company called Zapata Offshore, an oil drilling company. And where did Zapata like to drill for oil? Well, coincidentally, in places where the CIA was doing clandestine operations, always, without fail. That's just an appetizer, though. As for a main dish, consider the fact that Poppy Bush was in or around Dallas, Texas, on the day JFK was assassinated. Now, whenever he was asked about that, he would say, "I do not recall where I was that day," which is a very peculiar thing to say, because the Kennedy assassination, for people who lived through it, was kind of like 9/11. People remember where they were, what they were doing, etc., etc. So for him to not even have a cover story is dubious. Now, Poppy Bush's official narrative over the years was that he was only ever directly involved in the CIA when he very briefly served as the head of it during the 70s. But those of us in the know better. In addition to the things I've already talked about, there are now unredacted documents from 1964 at the very latest, which say things like, regarding the Kennedy assassination, a memo to Mr. George Bush of the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, his story for this one was, "That's not me, that's a different George Bush." To be fair, there was a different George Bush who worked for the CIA at the time. But this guy was so low level that he was not even allowed to answer the phone. So, unless there's a third George Bush of the CIA who would happen to be working for the organization at exactly the same time as these two guys, I think we know who it's referring to. I'd be willing to wager anything that if there's a Ben & Jerry's at CIA headquarters, they've got a flavor called George Sherbert Walker Bush to pay homage to their golden boy. Alright, now I could go on and on all night about the various misdeeds of Poppy Bush. More like Poopy Bush, am I right? But we'd be here all night, though, if I just did that. So I wanted to kind of analyze his overall life trajectory from a bird's eye view. It's very interesting, in my opinion. So Poppy Bush was born into political royalty. His father, Prescott, was a U.S. senator and a businessman who, among other things, had dealings with the Nazis. Very morally upstanding family we're dealing with here, obviously. Anyway, so Prescott was also a skull and bonesman at Yale, and later Poppy follows in his footsteps. And George Bush Sr. was one of these guys who was just like this pathological, ambitious ladder climber type. Guy who was running for president his entire life, in essence. And to be fair to him, he did climb that ladder. He goes from being a skull and bonesman to a secret CIA operative to oil millionaire, congressman, ambassador, later head of the CIA, vice president, cocaine trafficker, president. I mean, say what you will about him, he eventually did get to his goal. He became president of the United States. And then he got kicked out after one term like a little bitch. And not only that, but later he gets relegated to being not only no longer the most famous president in his own family, but also no longer the most famous president named George Bush. The second George Bush goes on to have a second term as president that Poppy never got, and kinda, sorta destroys the whole family legacy in the process. And then his son that he always wanted to replace him the whole time, Jeb, goes on to get bullied out of politics by the stupidest man in the world. What a life, what a legacy. Truth really is funnier than fiction, folks. All right, I've got about 50 seconds left, so I'm going to close the set by singing the final verse from the Ghetto Boys classic song, Damn It Feels Good to Be a Gangster. Now, as you might recall, this verse is sung from the point of view of the President of the United States, who at the time just happened to be George H.W. Bush. So without further delay. Damn, it feels good to be a gangster. Getting voted into the White House. Everything looking good to the people of the world, but the Mafia family is my boss. So every now and then I owe a favor, getting down on the big drug shipping through, and send it to the poor communities, so we can bust you-know-who. The voters of the world keep supporting me, and I promise to take you very far. Other leaders better not upset me, or I'll send 1 million troops to die at war. To all you Republicans that helped me win, I'd sincerely like to thank you, because now I got the world swinging from my nuts. Damn, it feels good to be a gangsta. All right, that's all I got. Thank you very much.